The suitcase clicked shut with the same finality I felt in my chest. 22 years of living in this house, and everything that truly mattered to me fit into 2 bags. I suppose that should have been my first clue about how little I actually belonged here. My name is Olivia Martinez, and today is the day I stopped pretending that blood means anything when it comes to family. The acceptance letter from the National Intelligence Agency lay crisp and official on my perfectly organised desk, the same desk where I'd spent countless nights studying while laughter echoed from downstairs, where my parents celebrated every small achievement of my adopted sister Elena, with the kind of joy they'd never shown for my academic excellence, my scholarship wins, my perfect attendance records. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my jacket pocket. My parents didn't even know I'd applied. Why would they? They'd stopped asking about my future plans years ago, around the same time Elena came into our lives with her charming smile and tragic backstory that made everyone want to rescue her. Olivia? My mother's voice drifted up the stairs, carrying that particular tone she used when she needed something from me, but couldn't be bothered to come find me herself. Can you help Elena with her college applications? I didn't answer. Let them wonder where I am for once. The irony wasn't lost on me. Elena, 19 and beautiful, in that effortless way that made people want to take care of her, was applying to local community colleges with grades that barely scraped by. Meanwhile, I was about to begin training with one of the most prestigious government agencies in the country, having graduated summa cum laude, with degrees in international relations and cybersecurity. But Elena had always been the priority. Elena needed help with homework. Elena needed emotional support after her traumatic childhood. Elena needed new clothes, a car, a sweet 16 party that cost more than my entire 4 years of university expenses. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the messages I'd ignored all week. Text after text from my parents, all variations of the same theme. Elena is struggling with her essay. Can you help? Elena needs a ride to her friend's house. You're not busy, right? Elena wants to apply to the same university as you did. Can you share your application materials? Never once did they ask how I was doing. Never once did they congratulate me on the interview that had taken 3 rounds and a security clearance check. I moved to my window and looked down at the driveway where Elena's car, a brand new Honda they'd bought her for her birthday, sat gleaming in the afternoon sun. My own transportation consisted of a bicycle I'd bought with money from my part-time job tutoring other students. When I'd asked about getting a car, my father had said we needed to be practical about expenses. Practical, responsible. Those had always been my roles in this family. The responsible one who never caused problems, never needed anything, never demanded attention. The invisible daughter who kept her room clean, maintained perfect grades, and solved everyone else's problems. But not anymore. The sound of Elena's laughter filtered through my closed door, followed by my mother's delighted response. They were probably looking at college brochures together, my mother offering the kind of patient guidance she'd never given me. I remembered being 17, sitting alone at the kitchen table with university applications, calculator in hand as I tried to figure out financial aid. My parents had been in the living room, helping Elena with a school project that somehow required the entire family's attention. We know you'll figure it out, Olivia, my mother had said when I'd mentioned needing help. You're so smart and capable. Smart and capable. Code for you don't need us. I opened my bedroom door and listened to the sounds of my family below. Elena was telling some story, her voice animated in the way that always made people lean in closer. My parents were responding with interest, asking follow-up questions, laughing at her jokes. When was the last time they'd asked me about my day? I couldn't remember. I paused at the kitchen doorway. They were all there, Mum, Dad and Elena, clustered around the island with college pamphlets, spread across the marble surface like colourful promises of a future they were eager to fund. "Oh, there you are," Mum said without looking up. "Elena's found some programs that look perfect for her. Can you look at the requirements and help her figure out what she needs to improve?" Elena smiled at me with that sweet, helpless expression that had been winning her special treatment since the day she arrived. "I'm just not as naturally smart as you are, Olivia. I need all the help I can get." Not naturally smart, as if intelligence was something you were born with rather than developed through years of study and sacrifice. As if Eleanor's mediocre grades were genetic rather than enabled laziness. "I can't," I said simply. Dad looked up for the first time, mildly irritated. "What do you mean you can't? You're not working today." "I'm leaving." The words hung in the air, too simple and final for any of them to process immediately. Eleanor laughed nervously. "Leaving for where? Are you going to meet friends?" "I'm leaving for Washington, D.C. tonight." Now I had their attention. All three faces turned toward me with identical expressions of confusion. "Washington?" Mum repeated. "What are you talking about?" I reached into my pocket and withdrew the letter, unfolding it carefully before placing it on the counter next to Eleanor's college brochures. The official seal caught the light. "The National Intelligence Agency offered me a position," I said. I accepted. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Dad picked up the letter, reading it twice before setting it down with shaking hands. "You applied for a job? Without telling us?" Mum's voice was small, uncertain. "Without discussing it with us?" Dad added, his tone carrying real concern I'd rarely heard directed at me. Eleanor leaned over to read the letter, her eyes widening. "This is a real government job? Like, with the CIA?" "Different agency," I said, "but similar level of security clearance and responsibility." "When did you even apply for this?" Mum demanded, something almost frantic in her voice now. "When did you have time for interviews?" "I've been working on it for 6 months," I replied calmly. "Background checks, psychological evaluations, skills assessments. It's been quite thorough." Dad was staring at me, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. 6 months? And you didn't think to mention this to us?" I met his gaze steadily. When would I have mentioned it? During the conversations we never have? At the family dinners where Elena needs help and I'm expected to provide it? During the moments when you notice I exist? "That's not fair," Mum protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" I picked up my bags. "When was the last time you asked me what I wanted to do with my life? When was the last time you showed interest in my achievements, my goals, my dreams?" Elena was looking between us with growing distress. "Olivia, I didn't know you felt—" "It's not about you, Eleanor," I interrupted gently. "It's about choices. It's about priorities. It's about 22 years of being treated like a supporting character in someone else's story." I walked toward the front door, my family trailing behind me like confused shadows. The taxi I'd called was pulling into the driveway, yellow and efficient and ready to take me towards a future I'd built entirely on my own. "You can't just leave," Dad said, real panic in his voice now. "What about Elena's applications? What about—" "Eleanor is 19 years old," I said, setting my bags down by the door. "She's perfectly capable of handling her own college applications, just like I was when I did mine alone." "But she needs help," Mom started. "Then help her yourself," I said. "Be the parents to her that you never were to me." The words hit them like physical blows. Dad actually staggered backward, and Mum's hand flew to her chest. "Olivia, please," Eleanor said, tears gathering in her eyes. "Don't leave like this. We can fix this. We can do better." I looked at her, really looked at her. and saw genuine distress. Elena wasn't malicious. She'd simply grown up accepting their devotion as her natural due. She probably had no idea how profoundly she'd been prioritized at my expense. "It's too late for better," I said softly. "This is my choice, my life, and for the first time I'm living it for myself." The taxi driver honked politely, and I opened the front door. Cool evening air rushed in, carrying the promise of everything that lay ahead. Training, challenge, purpose, respect earned rather than love withheld. "Olivia, wait," Mum called out as I loaded my bags into the trunk. "We love you. We've always loved you." I paused with my hand on the car door handle, the words I waited my entire life to hear, spoken only now when I was walking away from them forever. "You love the idea of me," I said. "The responsible daughter who never needed anything, who solved problems and stayed out of the way. But you never knew me. You never wanted to." I slid into the back seat and gave the driver the address for the airport. As we pulled away from the house, I looked back one last time to see my family standing in the doorway. Mum crying, Dad looking lost, Elena clutching the acceptance letter. The subdivision lights blurred past the window as we drove toward the highway, toward a life where my value wouldn't be measured against anyone else's needs. I thought about the training ahead, the missions that would challenge every skill I'd spent years developing, the colleagues who would judge me only on my competence. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was moving towards something rather than away from it. The phone in my pocket buzzed with incoming calls. Mum, Dad, Elena. But I turned it off without looking. I was done being the responsible one who always answered when they called. The dormitory at the training facility was Spartanly efficient. A single bed, desk, wardrobe, and nothing more. After 22 years of tiptoeing around a house that never quite felt like home, the austere simplicity was liberating. No family photos to remind me of my peripheral place in their lives. No Elena's belongings scattered everywhere, claiming space that was never mine to begin with. My phone had been buzzing incessantly since I'd turned it back on after landing in Washington. 47 missed calls, 63 text messages, all from the same 3 numbers I'd spent a lifetime making myself available to answer. I scrolled through the messages while my new roommate, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca from Texas, unpacked with military precision across the narrow room. "Olivia, please call us back. We need to talk." "Mum, this is ridiculous. Come home immediately." "Dad, I don't understand why you're doing this to us." "Elena. Elena is crying. She says it's her fault. Please, just come home, Mum. We'll discuss your career choices when you get back." "Dad, I'm sorry if I took too much attention. I never meant to hurt you." "Elena." The messages continued in this pattern. Mum pleading, Dad commanding, Elena apologising for things she didn't understand. I deleted them all without responding and turned my attention to the orientation packet Director Harrison had handed me that morning. "Family troubles?" Rebecca asked, observing my expression with the analytical gaze I was already learning to recognise in my fellow trainees. "Former family troubles," I corrected. "They're upset that their unpaid problem solver decided to solve her own problems instead." Rebecca snorted. "Same reason I joined the army, straight out of high school. Sometimes the only way to find your worth is to go somewhere that measures it properly." The training schedule was intense. 6 days a week, 14 hours a day, covering everything from advanced analytics to physical conditioning to psychological evaluation techniques. It was exactly what I needed. Complete immersion in a world where my value was determined by my performance, not my willingness to sacrifice my own goals for someone else's convenience. On the 3rd day, I made the mistake of checking my email during our lunch break. My parents had somehow obtained my government address. Subject, emergency at home. Olivia, Elena had a panic attack yesterday. She's convinced you hate her and that she ruined your life. She won't eat, won't sleep, and keeps asking what she did wrong. The doctor says it's severe anxiety brought on by guilt. Whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. Please come home. Your sister needs you. Mom, I stared at the screen, feeling that familiar tug of responsibility that had governed my life for so long. Elena, fragile and needing rescue. Mom, framing my absence as selfishness rather than self-preservation. The same dynamic that had kept me trapped in the role of the family caretaker since I was 12 years old. Bad news? Rebecca asked, settling beside me with her regulation lunch tray. Manipulation disguised as emergency, I said, closing the laptop. They're using my adopted sister's emotional breakdown to try to guilt me into coming back. Is she actually having a breakdown? I considered this. Elena had always been sensitive, prone to dramatic reactions when things didn't go her way. But she'd also learned early that tears and distress brought immediate attention and solutions from our parents. Probably, I admitted, but not for the reasons they think. She's upset because for the first time in her life, someone said no to helping her, and she doesn't know how to handle it. Rebecca nodded knowingly. My younger brother pulled the same thing when I left for basic training. Suddenly he was struggling with depression and needed his sister. Funny how that cleared up real quick once my parents realised I wasn't coming back to enable his laziness. The comparison stung because it was accurate. Elena wasn't malicious, but she'd been raised to believe that her needs took priority over everyone else's, including mine. My sudden absence had disrupted the family ecosystem that revolved around her comfort. That evening, during our free hour before lights out, I called my roommate from college, Jessica, the only person who'd witnessed the full scope of my family's dysfunction during our 4 years together. "Holy shit, Olivia," she said when I told her about the past week. "You actually did it. You got out." "They're saying Elena's having a breakdown because I left." "Elena's having a breakdown because she finally has to face consequences for something," Jessica said bluntly. "Remember sophomore year when she called you crying because she'd failed her driving test, and you drove 6 hours home to help her practice instead of studying for your organic chemistry final?" I did remember. I'd nearly failed that exam because I'd spent the weekend before it teaching Elena parallel parking and highway merging. When I'd mentioned this to my parents, they'd said I should have managed my time better. Or junior year when she forgot about her college application deadlines and you spent your spring break writing her personal statements. She said she was too overwhelmed to write them herself. Because she knew you'd do it for her if she cried hard enough, Jessica interrupted. "Olivia, you've been her personal assistant for a decade. Of course she's panicking now that she has to handle her own life." The truth of this settled in my stomach like a stone. I'd enabled Eleanor's helplessness as much as my parents had, always swooping in to solve her problems because it was easier than watching my family stress about her failures. "The question is," Jessica continued, "are you going to keep doing it?" 2 days later, Director Harrison called me into his office. He was a stern man in his 50s who'd made it clear that he expected nothing less than complete dedication from his trainees. "Martinez," he said, gesturing for me to sit, "you've been getting a lot of personal communications during training hours." My stomach dropped. "Sir, I've been deleting them without responding." "I'm not questioning your focus," he interrupted. "Your performance has been exemplary, but I'm curious about the content of these messages. Your file indicates you listed no emergency contacts except for the agency itself." "That's correct, sir." "Yet, someone has been calling the main office, claiming to be your mother, demanding to speak with you about family emergency." Heat flushed my cheeks. Of course they had. When direct contact failed, my parents had always escalated to authority figures. Teachers, professors, anyone they thought might force me to comply with their demands. "What did they say the emergency was?" I asked. Something about your sister being hospitalized due to emotional distress caused by your sudden departure. His expression was unreadable. I am required to ask if you need emergency leave to handle a family crisis. The careful phrasing told me everything I needed to know. He'd dealt with manipulative families before. No, sir, I said firmly. There's no emergency. My family is upset that I chose a career they weren't consulted about. They're using my adopted sister's emotional reaction to try to pressure me into returning home. Director Harrison nodded slowly. I see. And your assessment of your sister's condition? She's likely experiencing genuine distress, I said, but it's because she's never had to handle disappointment or independence before. My presence wouldn't solve the underlying problem. It would just delay her having to learn coping skills she should have developed years ago. Your recommendation for handling future contact attempts? Block them from calling the office, I said without hesitation. If there's a genuine emergency involving my legal next of kin, they can contact me through proper channels. Otherwise, they're interfering with federal training operations. Something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. Understood. I'll inform communications to screen their calls. That night, I wrote a single email to my parents. I am safe and focused on my training. Elena's emotional state is not my responsibility to manage, and attempting to manipulate me through manufactured crises will not bring me home. I suggest you help her develop the independence and coping skills she'll need as an adult, instead of using her distress to try to control my life choices. I will not be responding to further communications. Olivia. I sent it and immediately blocked all their numbers and email addresses. Rebecca watched me delete her contact information with something like admiration. How does it feel? I considered the question carefully. There was grief for the family I'd always wanted but never had. There was guilt, programmed by years of being told that my needs came second. But underneath it all was something I hadn't felt in years. Free, I said finally. It feels free. The next morning brought news that validated my choice. My training cohort rankings had been posted, and my name sat at the top of the list. For the first time in my life, I was being measured purely on my own merit, and I was excelling in ways that had nothing to do with how useful I was to other people. As I studied the list, I realised that my parents had been right about one thing. I was smart and capable. But they'd been wrong about what that meant. It didn't mean I was required to solve everyone else's problems while neglecting my own dreams. It meant I was strong enough to build a life where my intelligence and capability were valued, not exploited. 3 weeks into training, I heard through Jessica that Elena had started seeing a therapist and was slowly learning to handle her college applications independently. My parents had stopped calling Jessica's family to ask about me, which meant they were finally accepting that I wasn't coming back. The news should have brought relief. Instead, it brought a strange sort of sadness. Not for the family I'd left behind, but for all the years I'd spent believing that love meant making myself smaller so others could shine brighter. But that was behind me now. Ahead lay everything I'd worked for: purpose, respect, and a future built on my own terms. 6 months into my assignment at the Berlin station, I was reviewing intelligence reports when my secure phone rang, with a call I hadn't expected to receive again. Agent Martinez, this is Director Harrison. We've received a request through diplomatic channels for you to return to the United States temporarily. I set down my coffee, instantly alert. Sir? Your parents have contacted Senator Williams. Apparently they're constituents of his, claiming that you've been brainwashed by a government agency and are being held against your will in Europe. The audacity was breathtaking, even for them. 6 months of silence, and now they were involving federal legislators in their campaign to drag me back into their dysfunction. What exactly are they claiming, sir? That you left home suddenly after being recruited by a shadowy government organisation, and that your personality has been completely altered by psychological conditioning. They're demanding a wellness check and your immediate return for deprogramming. I rubbed my temples where a headache was building. And the senator's response? He's obligated to investigate constituent concerns about potential government misconduct. However, he's also been briefed on your voluntary enlistment, exemplary service record, and the fact that you're currently our top-performing analyst in the European division. They know I can't be contacted directly because of operational security, I said, understanding dawning. So, they're trying to force contact through official channels. Precisely. The senator will be satisfied with a brief video call confirming your mental state and voluntary service. But, Martinez? Director Harrison's voice carried a warning. This level of interference in an active agent's operations is unprecedented. If this continues, we'll need to consider more permanent solutions to protect agency security. More permanent solutions. That could mean anything from restraining orders to complete identity reassignment. The weight of their escalation settled on my shoulders. That evening, I stood in the secure communications room at the embassy, adjusting my uniform jacket before the scheduled call with Senator Williams. Through the encrypted video link, I could see him in his Washington office, flanked by two aides and looking distinctly uncomfortable. Agent Martinez, he began formally. I apologize for the irregular nature of this contact, but I've received some concerning allegations from your family members regarding your current situation. I understand, Senator. What would you like to know? Are you serving voluntarily with the National Intelligence Agency? Completely voluntarily, sir. I applied independently, underwent extensive screening, and have been promoted twice based on performance. Have you been subjected to any form of psychological manipulation or coercion? No, sir, unless you count learning to value my own professional development over serving as unpaid emotional labour for family members who never appreciated my contributions. One of his aides smirked before catching himself. Senator Williams leaned forward slightly. Your parents seem to believe your personality has undergone dramatic changes since joining the agency. My priorities have changed, sir. I now work in an environment where my intelligence and dedication are valued rather than exploited. If that seems like a personality change to people who only knew me as someone who sacrificed her own goals for their convenience, then perhaps they never knew my actual personality to begin with. The senator was quiet for a moment, clearly processing the subtext of family dysfunction beneath the professional veneer. Agent Martinez, do you wish to maintain contact with your family? No, sir. I've made it clear that I'm not interested in resuming a relationship where my role was to solve other people's problems, while my own needs were ignored. They've chosen to interpret this boundary as evidence of mental instability rather than personal growth. I see, and you're satisfied with your current assignment? Very much so, sir. I'm utilising skills I spent years developing, I'm contributing to important work, and I'm building a career based on merit, rather than obligation. After the call ended, I felt drained in a way that combat briefings never left me. My family's reach had followed me across an ocean, forcing me to justify my happiness to a federal legislator, because they couldn't accept that I'd chosen differently than they'd planned. 2 weeks later, Rebecca called from her assignment in Seoul with news that made my blood run cold. Olivia, you need to know, your family hired a private investigator to track you down. What? I nearly dropped my secure phone. Jessica called me. They approached her asking about your location, your mental state, whether you'd seemed unstable before you left. When she refused to cooperate, they showed her a business card for some PI firm and said they were conducting a welfare investigation into your whereabouts. I sat down heavily in my small Berlin apartment, watching snow fall outside my window while my family continued their campaign to drag me back into their orbit. Did Jessica tell them anything? She told them you were the sanest person she'd ever known, and that if you'd cut contact, they should examine why instead of harassing your friends. But, Olivia, they're not going to stop. This is escalating beyond a normal family drama. That night, I wrote a detailed report for Director Harrison, outlining the private investigator contact and requesting guidance on protecting my operational security. His response came back within hours. Report to Washington immediately for consultation on family interference protocols. The flight back to the United States felt surreal. 18 months ago, I'd left this country as an overlooked daughter fleeing a suffocating family dynamic. Now, I was returning as a federal agent whose family was threatening national security operations through their refusal to accept my independence. Director Harrison met me at Dulles Airport personally, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously the agency was taking this situation. The private investigator your family hired has been asking questions about agency facilities and trying to determine which foreign assignments might house American analysts, he said as we drove toward headquarters. That crosses the line from family harassment into potential security threats. What are my options? We can pursue federal charges for interfering with intelligence operations. We can arrange a supervised meeting where you formally reject their contact attempts with legal witnesses. Or, he paused, we can offer you a new identity and permanent assignment where they'll never find you. The nuclear option, a complete break not just from my family, but from Olivia Martinez entirely. Before I decide, I want to understand something, I said. Have they tried to contact Elena's therapist or counsellors to support their claims that I'm mentally unstable? According to our investigation, yes. Elena's therapist refused to provide information, but they've been shopping around for mental health professionals who might support their narrative that you've been brainwashed. The final piece of their strategy revealed itself. They weren't just trying to guilt me into returning. They were building a case for forced intervention, complete with manufactured psychological evidence. There's one more thing, Director Harrison said as we pulled into the secure parking garage. Elena has been trying to contact you through agency channels. She claims she wants to apologise and fix things between you. And your assessment? Either she's genuinely developing independence and wants to repair the relationship on healthier terms, or she's being used by your parents as a more sympathetic approach vector. Given the timing with the PI investigation, I lean toward the latter. That afternoon, I sat in a conference room reviewing transcripts of Elena's attempts to reach me. Her messages had evolved over the months from desperate apologies to more mature reflections on family dynamics. Either she was growing up or someone was coaching her on more effective manipulation tactics. Olivia, I've been in therapy for 8 months now, and I'm starting to understand how unfair things were for you. I know I took advantage of your help without appreciating it. I know Mum and Dad treated you like you didn't matter as much as I did. I want to fix this, but I don't know how if you won't talk to me. I'm not asking you to come home or give up your career. I'm asking for a chance to apologise properly, and maybe build a different kind of relationship where I'm not always taking and you're not always giving. I know you don't owe me anything. I know I hurt you even if I didn't mean to. But I miss my sister, and I want to be the kind of sister who deserves to be missed back. The messages were either genuine growth or sophisticated emotional manipulation. The problem was, with Elena, it had always been impossible to tell the difference. What's your instinct? Director Harrison asked. I studied the transcripts, looking for patterns I'd learned to recognise in my intelligence work. The language was more mature than Elena's usual communication style, but that could indicate personal growth. The timing coincided suspiciously with the escalation in my parents' interference tactics, but that could be coincidental. I think Elena might be genuine, I said finally, but I also think my parents are using her genuine guilt and growth as a weapon to try to re-establish contact with me. So, what's your decision about the 3 options? I looked out the window at the Virginia landscape, thinking about the girl who'd left this country, seeking a life where her value wasn't determined by her usefulness to others. That girl had found exactly what she was looking for: purpose, respect, professional satisfaction, and relationships built on mutual regard rather than dependency. I want the supervised meeting, I said, not to reconcile, but to make it clear that their interference with federal operations ends now. If they continue, I want the full legal response. And if they escalate beyond that, I met his eye steadily. Then we discussed the nuclear option. Director Harrison nodded approvingly. I'll arrange it for tomorrow. Fair warning, this might be the most difficult mission you've undertaken yet. He was right. It was one thing to outrun your past. It was another to face it down with the full weight of your new life behind you. The federal building's conference room felt like a courtroom as I entered, flanked by Director Harrison and the agency's legal counsel. Across the polished table sat my parents and Elena, along with their attorney, a nervous-looking man who kept shuffling papers as if they contained some magic solution to the mess his clients had created. My mother looked older, her face drawn with the kind of exhaustion that comes from months of fighting a battle you can't win. My father sat rigid, his jaw set in the stubborn line I remembered from every argument where he'd refused to admit he was wrong. Elena met my eyes briefly before looking away, her hands twisted in her lap. This meeting is being recorded and witnessed, announced Agent Rodriguez, the agency's legal representative. The purpose is to formally address harassment of a federal agent and establish clear boundaries for future contact. My father leaned forward immediately. We're not harassing anyone. We're trying to save our daughter from whatever you people have done to her. Mr. Martinez, Agent Rodriguez said coolly, your daughter is a decorated intelligence analyst who has voluntarily served her country for 18 months. You've involved a senator, hired private investigators to track her movements, and attempted to interfere with classified operations. That's not parental concern. That's obstruction of federal duties. She was never like this before, my mother said, her voice breaking. Olivia was always so caring, so family-oriented. She would never have just abandoned us. The word abandoned hit exactly as she intended. I felt the familiar pull of guilt, the trained response to their pain that had controlled me for 2 decades. But now I recognized it for what it was: emotional manipulation disguised as love. I didn't abandon you, I said quietly. I stopped enabling you. Elena looked up sharply at my words. Olivia, I've been trying to reach you because I understand now. What we did to you, what I let happen, it was wrong. Elena. My mother's voice carried a warning that made me suspect this wasn't the script they'd rehearsed. But Elena continued, her voice gaining strength. No, Mum. I've spent 8 months in therapy learning about family dynamics and codependency. I finally understand what Dr. Peterson meant when she said I was parentified without realizing it. Parentified? Director Harrison asked. When a child is forced to take on adult responsibilities, Elena explained, glancing at me. But in our family, it wasn't me. It was Olivia. She was expected to be the parent figure, solving my problems, managing my emotions, sacrificing her needs for mine. My father's face reddened. That's ridiculous psychobabble. We treated both girls equally. Did you? Elena's voice was steady now, and I saw a strength in her I'd never noticed before. When did you last ask Olivia about her dreams? When did you celebrate her achievements without immediately asking her to help me with something? When did you make her feel like she mattered for who she was, instead of what she could do for others? The silence stretched uncomfortably. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time they seemed like tears of recognition rather than manipulation. I brought something, Elena said, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a thick folder and slid it across the table to me. I found these in the attic when I was looking for my old school records. I opened the folder and felt my breath catch. Inside were newspaper clippings, certificates, honour roll notifications, scholarship announcements, a complete record of my academic achievements from elementary school through college, every award I'd won, every recognition I'd received, carefully collected and preserved. "Mum kept all of this," Elena said softly, "every single thing, but she never showed them to anyone. Never put them on the refrigerator like she did with my art projects. Never framed them like she did with my participation trophies." I stared at the evidence of my parents' pride they'd hidden so thoroughly I'd never known it existed. Academic excellence so consistent it had become invisible to them. Achievements so expected they'd stopped being celebrated. "You were our sure thing," my mother whispered. "We never worried about you because you never gave us reason to worry. Elena needed so much help, so much attention, and you were always so capable. So you ignored me," I said, my voice steady despite the emotions churning beneath the surface. "We took you for granted," my father admitted, the words seeming to cost him enormous effort. "We assumed you knew how proud we were. We assumed you understood that we loved you. Love without attention is just indifference, that," I replied. "And assumptions aren't the same as communication." Elena leaned forward. "That's what I wanted to tell you. In therapy, I realized that I knew you were making sacrifices for me, but I told myself you were happy to help because you never complained. I used your willingness to give as an excuse to keep taking." "And now?" I asked. "Now I'm learning to handle my own problems. I applied to colleges myself, wrote my own essays, even got a part-time job to help pay for things. It's scary sometimes, but it's also freeing. Like I'm finally becoming a real person instead of just someone who needs to be rescued." I studied my sister, really looked at her, and saw something I'd never seen before. Confidence. Not the brittle, attention-seeking confidence of someone who'd been coddled, but the quiet self-assurance that comes from handling your own challenges. "The question now," Agent Rodriguez interjected, "is whether this family can respect Agent Martinez's boundaries moving forward. The private investigator has been warned off, but any further interference with federal operations will result in criminal charges." My father shifted uncomfortably. "We just wanted to know she was safe." "You wanted to control her," Elena said with surprising firmness. "Just like you controlled me, except she was strong enough to leave when I wasn't." "Elena's right," my mother said, tears streaming down her cheeks now. "We turned Olivia into our solution to everything, our perfect daughter who fixed problems and never caused them. And when she finally stood up for herself, we couldn't handle losing our your unpaid family manager," I supplied. She flinched but nodded. "We're sorry, Olivia. We're so sorry." I looked at the folder of achievements in front of me, then at my family sitting across the table. For the first time in my memory, they were seeing me clearly, not as an extension of their needs, but as a person with my own worth and boundaries. "I accept your apology," I said finally. "But accepting an apology doesn't mean resuming the old relationship. I've built a life where I'm valued for who I am, not what I can do for others. I won't give that up." "We're not asking you to," Elena said quickly. "I was hoping maybe we could build something new, where I'm not taking and you're not giving all the time, where we actually get to know each other as people instead of as roles in the family drama." I considered this. The Elena sitting across from me seemed genuinely different, more self-aware, more responsible, more like the sister I'd always hoped she could become. "What would that look like?" I asked. "Maybe we start with emails." real ones, where we share what's happening in our lives instead of me asking for help with problems. Maybe eventually phone calls where we talk about things we're interested in, instead of things I need help with. It was such a small request, but it represented something I'd never had, a relationship with my family based on mutual interest rather than one-sided obligation. "I'm willing to try that," I said, "with Elena, but there are conditions." "Anything," my mother said quickly. "No guilt trips about my career choices. No demands for visits or family obligations. No attempts to make me responsible for anyone else's emotional well-being. If Elena has problems, she handles them herself or asks our parents for help. Not me." "Agreed," Elena said immediately. "And if any of you violate these boundaries, all contact stops permanently. No second chances, no explanations, no dramatic appeals. I'll disappear completely, and next time I'll make sure you can never find me." The threat hung in the air with absolute sincerity. They all understood that I now had the resources and authority to vanish from their lives entirely if they pushed too far. "We understand," my father said quietly. As we prepared to leave, Eleanor approached me hesitantly. "Olivia, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but are you happy, really happy?" I thought about my life now. The challenging work that pushed my abilities to their limits, the colleagues who respected my expertise, the sense of purpose that came from contributing to something larger than family drama. I thought about my small apartment in Berlin with its view of the city lights, the weekend trips to Prague and Vienna, the person I'd become when I wasn't defined by other people's needs. "Yes," I said and meant it completely. "I'm happier than I ever thought possible." Eleanor smiled, and for the first time in our lives, it didn't look like she wanted something from me. "Good," she said. "You deserve that." 6 months later, I received an email from Elena with photos of her college acceptance letters. 4 schools, all acceptances she'd earned herself. The message was brief, but genuine. "Thought you'd want to know I'm figuring it out. Thanks for showing me what independence looks like." I replied with congratulations and a story about my latest assignment in Prague. For the first time in our relationship, we were communicating as equals rather than as caretaker and dependent. It wasn't the family I'd grown up wanting, but it was something better. A relationship built on respect rather than obligation, on choice rather than duty. And that was enough.